What up, everybody? In OG Power, Kanan got out of prison after around 10 years at the end of Season 1, as Sean picked him up when he got out. But he didn't want Ghost and Tommy knowing he was out, so he could try to cover his tracks with pink sneakers and making sure they didn't find out he was who was behind the attacks against their organization. Then soon after showing his face to Ghost and Tommy and letting them know he was out, Kanan then wiped out the RSK gang in order to get back control of his old stomping grounds of Southside Jamaica, Queens. But after Ghost put Kanan back in charge of the Southside, Kanan then snatched up Dre's boy, Brock, for Dre to finish off, and that was the last time we saw Kanan for a minute, as at that point, he left Dre in charge to run things, and Ghost was wondering where Kanan went. Something else to keep in mind is that this same episode, the last episode before Kanan left town, is when he went to visit Jarita, his baby mama, and got that bag of money from her. Then as Ghost was trying to figure out where Kanan was and started pressing Sean went to talk to Dre and let Dre know that Lobos was about to be in town. And Dre then called Kanan, letting him know that the news he was waiting for just walked in the front door, as Kanan had a plan to try to undercut Ghost and Tommy with Lobos. The next episode, Kanan was back in New York at Jarita's house, as he told Sean he was out of town because he had some business to take care of. When Kanan got back to New York, he had also updated his wardrobe during the time he was gone, as he was still wearing the clothes he had prior to getting locked up before that. So this leaves the question, where did Kanan go when he left town, and for what reason did he go out of town for? A lot of people think he might have potentially been in DC visiting Jukebox at this point in time, as he ended up in DC with Jukebox after Ghost left him for dead at the end of Season 2. But if he was in DC, I have serious doubts that he saw Jukebox at this point, because number one, we know for a fact he wasn't staying at Jukebox's house in DC, because Kanan had never met Candy until he was recovering at Jukebox's house in Season 3, as Candy told Kanan that she's never seen Jukebox let anybody stay there before. And it was apparent by their conversation that was Kanan and Candy's first time meeting. And the second reason why I don't think he connected with Juke when he was out of town at this point in time was because in Season 3, when Jukebox helped Kanan, it sounded like that was the first time that they had talked since Kanan got out of prison, because he didn't trust her now that she was a cop, and neither did she know anything about Kanan's plan to get back at Ghost. Then after Kanan killed Jukebox, he took the bag of money and left town again, but this time we know that Kanan was back in Washington, D.C., and it was even said that Kanan was supposed to have been moved to Washington, D.C. at this point, but when he went back to New York to handle some business, he was attacked by Crystal Ball soldiers, and he joined back up with Ghost and Tommy. But the fact that Kanan left town the first time with the bag of money he got from Jarita, and the second time with the money he stole from Tommy, makes me wonder what he did with all the money he stole, because those two bags had to have been around $1 million, maybe even more. And he didn't use the money he stole when he got back in business with Tommy, because he robbed Crystal Ball to get that money. When Kanan was in DC, prior to coming back to New York, he was also there building up his own crew, almost like he had better connections in DC than he did in New York at that point in his life. We also know that Kanan was definitely getting into some kind of dirt when he was in DC as well, because when Tariq called Kanan looking for Ray Ray, Kanan had two guys cleaning up the blood from the trunk of his Benz. In addition to that, we know that DC was already a location on Kanan's mind years prior to getting out of prison, as it was said that it was Kanan who told Jukebox to move to DC and embrace who she really is. And now that we have some information in regards to the Origins cast, we find out that it's likely that Kanan had a connection to the DC and Baltimore area prior to going to prison, as Tremont Stinson from Baltimore and who handles distro in the DC area as well, has been cast to return to the storyline in Origins. So because Tremont is already pretty established in the game on the Raising Kanan timeline, by the Origins timeline, he's gonna be an OG in the game. So I'm thinking that he's likely gonna be coming in as a Connect in Origins. But even if Kanan's Connect was from DC and Origins, that still want to explain how Kanan was able to go to DC in Power and build up his own crew that fast. What he was doing when he was out of town in Power Season 2. What happened to those bags of money. And why those guys in DC were cleaning the blood out of Kanan's trunk. So it's likely whatever he was doing in DC on the OG Power timeline is probably a storyline that dates back to Power Origins. Because in the same type of way that Kanan wanted to eliminate Ghost, he might have had someone in DC he was trying to take off the board as well. And maybe he didn't have a chance to do it in Season 2 of OG Power because Dre called him before he was able to handle his business. But after he killed Jukebox, he potentially could have went back to DC and finished the job. And Kanan's long game might have even been to take over 2 organizations to end up running both New York and DC. Something else to also keep in mind when we're talking about Kanan being out of town and handling business out of town is the fact we also know that he has an aunt and 2 cousins that live in Virginia Beach. So there's also the question if Kanan's cousins will come back into the storyline as well. And there's also the fact how when Kanan got out of prison, he told Ghost and Tommy he went to see his mom, then went straight to see them. But we know that was a lie and that Kanan had been out of prison for a minute. But what if there was more to Kanan telling Ghost and Tommy that he went to see his mother than we thought? What if it was actually an alibi? Because the fact that Kanan had been out of prison for a minute and Ghost could have easily figured out the exact date Kanan got out of prison, as is published online on the prison database. So as Kanan potentially needed an alibi for when Ghost checked things out, maybe he used Rock as an alibi because the fact maybe she's no longer living in New York but out of state, so traveling out of state to visit his mother, then coming back to New York after and dropping in on Ghost would actually make sense as an alibi. So if that was actually his alibi, maybe when Kanan did go out of town in Season 2, he was actually going to see Rock for real. But even then, that still leaves the question, what happened to all of Kanan's money? So there's a lot of unanswered questions from Power that we could get more backstory into in Origins. And with Tremont being cast for Origins and knowing there will be a Baltimore and DC storyline, it looks like the writers do intend on filling in some of these gaps in the story. And there you have it. Leave your thoughts, theories, and predictions in the comments.